Stop. You hadn't subscribed to the channel yet? Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now let's go. We had been married for 13 years, and for much of that time, I believe we were doing all right. Our home was a modest two-story house in a quiet suburb outside of Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just a clapboard structure painted pale blue, with a narrow driveway and a yard bordered by a picket fence that needed a fresh coat of white paint. Early on, I'd planted a few rose bushes near the porch, the type that bloomed fiery red in the summer. My wife Sarah and I had met in college at a friend's party. She had intrigued me with her quiet confidence, her dark, wavy hair that fell to her shoulders, her soft brown eyes that always seemed half lost in thought. There was an air of mystery about her. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did share her opinions, they were often tinged with a wry humor that made me smile. I suppose I was the one who pursued her most ardently. From the start, I sensed an imbalance. I loved her deeply, passionately. She accepted my affection, but rarely mirrored its intensity. Maybe that's not uncommon in relationships. One partner adores, the other allows themselves to be adored. It never bothered me before. After all, we had formed what I considered a decent American life. I worked as a systems analyst at a tech company downtown. Sarah was a freelance editor who mostly worked from home. We had 2 children, our son Aiden, a bright, sensitive 7-year-old who loved dinosaurs and drawing, and our daughter Lily, who was just a year old and still learning to toddle across the living room carpet. The kids were beautiful and healthy. From the outside, we must have seemed like a typical family, going about our days with a certain quiet normalcy. It was after Lily's birth that the cracks began to show. Sarah decided to take a break from her editing clients to focus on the kids full-time. It seemed like a sensible choice. Childcare costs were high, and we agreed that one parent at home would provide stability. But staying home, isolated with the children, day after day, wore on her. Sarah had never been particularly domestic. While I worked long hours, she was left with tantrums and diapers and endless piles of laundry. The evenings I came home late, I would find her exhausted, hair tied back in a haphazard ponytail, eyes shadowed with fatigue. We fought more frequently, small, sniping arguments at first, escalating to full-blown shouting matches. I remember one evening, standing in the kitchen, still in my work slacks and a button-down shirt, as she hurled the spatula onto the countertop, yelling that I didn't understand. And in truth, I didn't fully understand. I wanted to, but I was caught up in my own stress. Deadlines, office politics, a fear of not providing enough. The tension thickened between us like humidity before a thunderstorm. That was around the time she began to drink. Initially, just a glass of red wine after the kids were asleep. A harmless indulgence, I thought. But soon one glass turned into 2, and then I'd come home and find a half-empty bottle sweating on the dining table. On some nights, I'd discover her already slurring her words, swaying slightly as she rinsed a plate or folded laundry. The smell of cheap wine clung to her breath and clothes. I remembered her father, a man I'd never truly known, who had died from complications related to alcoholism years before we met. That legacy of addiction haunted Sarah's family, and I was terrified to see it taking root in my wife. I approached her about it gently at first. "Sarah," I said one evening, my voice low so Aiden wouldn't overhear from the living room where he was watching cartoons. "I'm worried. You're drinking more than usual, and your father." She cut me off, frowning, her arms folded. She stood there, wearing faded jeans and one of my old t-shirts, her hair loose and disheveled. "Michael, this is temporary. I'm under a lot of pressure, okay? Once Lily is sleeping through the night, once I get some time to myself, this will pass." I offered counseling, therapy, a doctor's visit. She refused, growing defensive. "You think I'm an alcoholic? I'm just stressed. God, can't you trust me to handle my own life?" Despite her promises, things only got worse. Some weeks she'd stop drinking for a day or 2, almost as if to prove she could. But the cycle would resume, and each time it seemed a little harder to break. The tension between us crackled in the air, and the love I'd once felt so strongly began to feel like a heavy weight pressing against my heart. One scorching August evening, I returned home from work later than usual. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky awash in pink and orange. The asphalt on our quiet suburban street still radiated heat. I noticed immediately that our front door stood slightly ajar. My chest tightened. I rushed inside and found the house eerily quiet. I bolted upstairs. Aiden lay asleep in his dinosaur pajamas, sprawled across his bed, the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling faintly visible. Lily, in her crib, breathed softly, clutching a stuffed giraffe. Both children were safe, but Sarah was nowhere to be found. I tried her cell phone. It rang and went to voicemail. I called her friends. None had heard from her. The neighbors hadn't seen her. Hours crawled by as I sat in the darkened living room, the TV muted, my heart pounding with fear, anger, and something I couldn't quite name. Shame, maybe, that I couldn't control this situation or help my wife. Around 4 in the morning, headlights swept across our front yard. I peered through the blinds and saw a dark sedan idling at the curb. The passenger door opened, and Sarah stumbled out, laughing softly, clearly intoxicated. A tall man stepped out of the driver's seat, broad shoulders, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, his face partially hidden by the shadows. My blood turned cold. I wanted to look away, to pretend I wasn't seeing what I saw next, but I couldn't. Sarah leaned in close to him, pressing her lips against his. A kiss. A knowing, lingering kiss that pierced me like a knife. They exchanged words, muffled by the glass and the distance, their silhouettes framed by the glow of the street lamp. Then he climbed back into his car and drove off, taillights receding down the quiet street. Sarah swayed up the driveway, her steps unsteady. I flew to the door, my mind on fire. She stumbled inside, smelling of alcohol and cheap cologne. The rage in me boiled over. Who was that? I demanded, voice hushed but fierce, so as not to wake the children. Sarah, who the hell is he? She looked at me through half-lidded eyes. Her makeup smudged, her hair tangled over one shoulder. Just, Sam, she slurred, her words thick. She tried to brush past me, but I grabbed her arm, not roughly, just enough so she'd have to face me. She jerked free, scowling as though I were a stranger who dared to stop her on the street. Sam who? I asked again, desperation creeping into my tone. I wanted her to give me something, some explanation, some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, she muttered something incoherent and stumbled into the living room. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't say another word, collapsing onto the couch, eyes shutting almost instantly in drunken oblivion. That night, I sat awake, a silent sentinel in the dark, listening to her uneven breathing. I felt as though my world had cracked open. She had abandoned our children, left them alone in an unlocked house, then come home with another man. The betrayal was staggering. In the faint early light, I watched her stir and groan, hungover. I said nothing as I dressed for work, my mind heavy and numb. The next morning, I confronted her more calmly, hoping daylight might bring a shred of honesty. Sarah, I began, standing in the kitchen while she sipped water, staring at the sink. Tell me what happened last night. Who is Sam? Are you having an affair? You left the kids alone. Do you understand what you did? She didn't meet my eyes. She said nothing coherent. I saw shame flash across her face. Then it vanished behind a dull indifference. Just drop it, she mumbled at last. In that moment, something inside me withered. I realized that the woman I loved was slipping away into a place I couldn't reach. The confident tilt of her chin, the lively spark in her eyes, all gone. In their place stood a stranger, cradling a secret life that I was powerless to unravel. In the months that followed, things hit rock bottom. I pressed her to get help, and eventually, after one particularly brutal argument, she agreed to see a specialist. We tried marital counseling. We met with a family therapist who helped create a plan for her sobriety. Over time, slowly, she improved. Sarah learned to admit that she had a problem, learned to apologize for leaving the children alone that night, learned to ask for forgiveness for what happened with Sam, who, as it turned out, was an old acquaintance from a local bar she'd been frequenting in secret. They had met a handful of times. It wasn't about love, she said, just about escape. Escape from what? I never entirely understood. Maybe from her own sense of inadequacy, or from the life she felt trapped in. She sobered up after 6 months of therapy and daily check-ins with her counselor. She reconnected with old friends who supported her new lifestyle, found a support group for mothers struggling with addiction. In these ways, she began to rebuild herself, brick by brick. She'd stand in front of me, tears in her eyes, telling me how sorry she was, her voice quiet, careful, as though afraid to break the fragile peace we had forged. She thanked me for not leaving immediately, for giving her time to change. And yet, as I watched her become a better, steadier version of herself, I noticed something hollow within me. The love I once had, fiery, devoted, had become cold ash. I couldn't shake the memory of that night, the way she'd kissed that man beneath the streetlight. I couldn't erase the betrayal of coming home to find our children alone in an unlocked house while she drank herself senseless elsewhere. I realized that the damage to our marriage wasn't just about her actions. It was about the trust and respect that had once anchored us. They were gone now, and I had no idea how to retrieve them. We lived together still, sharing the same home for the children's sake. Aiden and Lily need stability, and I can offer that by maintaining a household that looks, from the outside, almost normal. We eat dinner together. We talk about the kids' days at school or about Lily's progress as she learns new words. Sometimes I catch Sarah's eye across the table, and she gives me a small, sad smile. I can see the remorse lurking in her expression. She's doing everything she can to be a good mother now, and she is succeeding in that. She's present, sober, attentive, patient with the kids. She has apologized to me so many times that I've lost count, but I remain distant, cordial rather than loving. When I think of our future, I see a divorce looming on the horizon. Staying together feels like a charade. I can't envision a lifetime of this uneasy truce, this painful dance of civility without real warmth. Every day I remain feels like one more step toward an inevitable ending. I know that someday I will have to tell the kids, explain why mommy and daddy don't sleep in the same bed anymore, why we will no longer share a home. I dread that moment, knowing it will break their hearts. But I also know that continuing in this half state, where love has been replaced by an uneasy alliance, is not truly living. It's surviving. I feel sorry for Sarah sometimes. She's battling her demons, and I admire her courage and sobriety. I see the effort it takes her to face her past mistakes, to navigate the guilt. But pity is not love, and neither is forgiveness without trust. We have built a framework of respect for the sake of the children, but the spark that once drove me to pursue her across a crowded dorm party all those years ago is gone. So here we remain, two people in a quiet suburb, pretending at normalcy. The sun still sets over our patchy lawn every evening, painting the sky in dusky hues. The rose bushes still bloom in the summer. The children still run across the yard, laughing as they play tag. And inside our home, we share meals, chores, and polite conversation. But we are no longer who we once were. I stay for now, tethered by duty and lingering compassion, even though my heart is no longer hers. In time, I will find the strength to let go, to finalize a separation that seems inevitable. I will mourn the marriage that could have been, and I will move forward, hoping the children understand that some wounds never fully heal. Sarah will continue her journey, too, hopefully stronger, wiser, capable of building a better life on her own terms. We will become two separate lives, connected only by the love we share for Aiden and Lily, and perhaps that will have to be enough.